Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Connecticut Psychological Association Social Justice Speaker Series. We are honored to have Dr. Jessica Cerdeña as our esteemed speaker tonight. Dr. Cerdeña's talk title is Pressing Onward, the Imperative Resilience of Latina Migrant Mothers in Connecticut. A warm welcome. My name is Shiva, and I serve as the chair of the CPA Social Justice Committee. Joining me today are our passionate social justice members, Anne, Beth, Kyler, and Andrew. Also, I want to acknowledge Dr. Sydney Simmons for all she has done for social justice over the past 2 years. Due to relocation, she will continue her journey of success and community service in her own place, new hometown. The Social Justice Speaker Series serves as a catalyst for our common goals to empower ourselves, our clients, and the community we serve. To sustain this critical work for you, we rely on fundraising and the generosity of those who believe in the power of education and awareness of our biases. We sincerely appreciate all donations moving forward, and we are truly grateful to our sponsors. Your support is the foundation that keeps this vital work alive and thriving. I'm going to share the donation slides with you. As you see here, we have donors in the platinum level comprehensive neuropsychological services for the 5th consecutive year, the CPA Educational Foundation for the 3rd consecutive year, and in 2025, Stacy Tata has generously donated $5,000 to social justice in memory of her beloved parents, Dr. Jack and Lynn Plummer. You also see the supporter in 2025, Dr. Bourgeois. Thanks everyone for participating tonight. I'm going to turn it over to Andrew to share additional information with you.
Hello, everyone. On behalf of the Planning Committee, we are thrilled that you could join us this evening, and we sincerely hope that you will continue to attend our future speaker series sessions. We're enthusiastic about Dr. Jess Cardena's Social Justice Speaker Series event presentation this evening. As a reminder, the CPA Social Justice Speaker Series offers free monthly meetings to CPA members, the wider Connecticut community, and our nationwide supporters. I welcome you to our speaker series event this evening. I will now hand it over to Kyler for a biography of our speaker.
Thank you so much, Andrew. So, Dr. Jessica Cerdeña received her MD PhD in medical anthropology from Yale University, where she began using scholarship and activism as tools for health justice. Dr. Cerdeña co-coined the term race-conscious medicine to emphasize how racism, rather than race, determines illness and health. In her book, Pressing Onward, The Imperative Resilience of Latina Migrant Mothers, narrates the ways women who migrated from Latin America overcome structural oppression to build futures for themselves and their children. Dr. Cerdeña is currently completing her family medicine residency and will continue working at the intersection of research, community-oriented primary care, and health policy. So with that, it is now my distinct honor to invite Dr. Cerdeña to lead us through what promises to be an insightful and inspiring presentation. So Dr. Cerdeña, the platform is yours.
Thank you so much. Give me 1 second as I just make a quick adjustment to be able to share my slides with you. All right, are you seeing my screen? Perfect. So thank you to Kyler, thank you to Beth, thank you to the entire organizing team of the Social Justice Committee Speaker Series for the Connecticut Psychological Association for this invitation. I am really, really honored to be able to speak with you and grateful for all that you have done to be able to coordinate this very important session. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me just make sure that everything is still coordinated, or it seems like I might have lost my sharing.
Yeah, we've still got your screen. It's just
You
the
do? Okay,
yeah, the presentation, that little pop-up kind of came up and
hang on. Let me just figure out what happened there. My slides seem to have just decided to disappear, but we will get them back. Take two. Are we together again?
looks good to me.
All right. So my comments with you today come from my years of research with migrant mothers, clinicians, and community leaders in New Haven, which form the basis of my book, Pressing Onward. I focus this talk on the traumatic experiences that mothers have endured from their migrations from Latin America to Southern Connecticut, the role of legal violence in their oppression, and the concept of imperative resilience, which I developed to describe how migrant mothers enact psychological, social, and emotional strategies to get by or press onward in their day-to-day lives. And I also talk about policy solutions to envision more nurturing environments for the patients and families in our care and in our community. I value and look forward to your feedback. Miss, I'm very sorry. Lydia halted, her voice lacking the easy confidence of our earlier conversation. I'm worried that my details could be exposed, and the truth is very concerning, above all for the safety of my family. I reassured Lydia that her information would remain confidential and that she was welcome to share no more than she felt comfortable doing. In Honduras, my husband was a doctor. He worked for the Ministry of Health and for the Attorney General's office. He was the coroner in the area where we lived. Lydia began tentatively. What happened is that about a year ago, my husband began receiving anonymous letters at our door. After a couple of months, my husband moved us, saying it was so I could be closer to work. But we were only there about a month when he tells me, "Look, my assignment has been changed and we need to move to the city." I asked myself, how could it be that we just unpacked the last box from our move a few days ago and now we have to move again? My husband said it again that it was due to his job, so we moved. After about 4 or 5 months, I noticed my husband acting more strangely. He never said anything to me until one morning before going to work, he woke me up and said, "Look, I need to talk to you." He begins to tell me about months of letters threatening him, his job, and our family. That morning, he had found my car with the entire passenger side beaten in and a note that said, "As much as you want to hide, we know where you are, and we know where your wife and son are." The police said they were going to protect us, but it never happened. No one was outside the house. No one knocked on our door to say, "We're here in case of any suspicious activity." I mean, nothing, nothing, nothing. We had a tourist visa for the US that we'd received 3 years prior, by the grace of God. We had no choice but to leave. We took one suitcase each. I didn't even say goodbye to my parents. Lydia's husband took a job in landscaping to support them following their move to New Haven. In Honduras, my husband was a professional, a doctor. And now what does he do? The changes in his body, in his face, in his hands have been... Lydia's voice trailed off. He comes home and plays with my son, and my son says, "Daddy, your hands hurt me." And my husband says, "Well, yes, look, my hands are hurt." And my son tells him, "Yes, but don't touch me with your hands. You're hurting me." Lydia's family had applied for political asylum, but according to their lawyer, their case was complicated because they had overstayed their tourist visas. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, their case had not yet been processed when we spoke. "We move around with the greatest caution," Lydia said, "because we're already here. Illegal, ilegal, you know?" Lydia's story exposes the impact of socio-political violence in Latin America and how legal constraints in the US limit their life opportunities. Although some migrants leave their home countries voluntarily out of a sense of adventure or to seek better opportunities, migration often results from the failure of the state to protect its citizens. In these cases, migration may be a life or death decision. Here I discuss the forms of state failure and violence in Latin America that compel hundreds of thousands to flee each year. Latin American history is pierced by violence. From colonization, African enslavement, and indigenous genocide in the 15th through 18th centuries, to political conflicts and brutal dictatorships amid state modernization in the 19th and 20th centuries, and social strife arising from state destabilization in the contemporary period, each era of Latin American history features acts of inhumanity perpetrated by dominant social and political groups against subordinate ones. But while this history of violence affects individuals and communities through historic and transgenerational trauma, it is the current sociopolitical upheaval, including assaults and homicides, as well as weak social safety nets, that most directly informs decisions to migrate. This new violence reflects social disruption and the ways gestures toward democratization have failed to meet the needs of citizens. Lydia detailed the pain of thrusting her 4-year-old son into a strange country. "It's so stressful for him to speak English. He asks me, 'But Mommy, why can't I speak English?' And to everyone on the street, he asks, 'Do you speak Spanish? Do you speak Spanish?' He wants to play and interact with others, but he can't. It's so difficult." The decision to migrate is fraught with danger, destabilization, and isolation. Yet the advantages to life in the United States often outweigh the struggles of migration and resettlement. In short, state failure not only drives transnational migration, but also sustains it. The production and maintenance of an underclass in Latin America, stripped of civic entitlements, spawns a new underclass of illegals in the United States who serve as a cheap and exploitable labor force. However, the process of migration itself inflicts its own harms, which I will share through the narrative of Caridad. "We were 3 or 4 women and 13 men in the group," Caridad said, a 34-year-old woman from Peru. "If we had to run, we women knew we'd be left behind." Caridad spent 3 months traveling from Peru to the Mexican border. She had to pay off multiple soldiers and border guards to arrive safely. They gave us a backpack with water, some fruit, and some canned food. The water was so heavy, I didn't want to carry it. And the canned food was awful. It weighed so much, didn't give much energy, and made us sick. On the 2nd or 3rd day, I couldn't carry it all anymore. I left almost everything behind. Another Peruvian man in the group helped me carry my gallon of water. Despite all that, I became very dizzy. The man took out some oranges and pressed them to my lips. He told me I needed to go to the river to drink some water. I couldn't walk, so he carried me on his shoulders and brought me water from the river. We had to hide in holes in the ground from the immigration planes overhead. When Border Patrol found us, the man and I managed to hide in some bushes, but they caught the other woman, the niece of another traveler, and sent her back to Mexico. The uncle crossed back to find her and try again. Then it was just 12 men and me. I tried to lead. I thought, if they start running, where will that leave me? After several more weeks of travel, Caridad arrived in New Haven. It's safer here. In Peru, they'll shut the lights out on the bus and steal a necklace right off your neck. It happened to me. Gave me a huge red mark, Caridad explained. Here in New Haven, you can carry your purse to the store without worry. Plus, in the summer, it smells like the ocean, she adds, a smile radiating through her voice. Caridad attests to the physical toll of migrating across the Sonoran Desert. She endured dehydration, exposure, and the precarities of being a woman in groups of mostly men. But Caridad was lucky. She arrived at her destination safely, without encountering immigration authorities directly. Less fortunate migrants may make multiple attempts to cross after environmental hazards and immigration authorities force them back. Latin American migrant women face dangers such as thievery, rape, assault, kidnapping, extortion, and dehydration. After settling in the United States, many of these women experience intimate partner violence, as their social positions make them vulnerable to abuse. Over 75% of Latin American migrant women living in the United States report histories of trauma. Scholars Ferreira and Ornelas refer to harrowing migration experiences as painful passages that put migrants at risk of physical and mental harm. Trauma often involves a close encounter with physical violence or death. However, trauma also encompasses the emotional response to such experiences, the psychic scars left by tragic and painful events. Trauma is therefore a clinical and social event in which individuals' subjective memories of trauma shape or rupture their sense of coherence in their lives and may lead to symptoms of mental illness. Migrants, including voluntary migrants as well as refugees and asylum seekers, are especially susceptible to trauma and its aftermath. Migration-related trauma, a term referring to trauma surrounding departure or displacement from a country of origin and relocation in a destination country, applies to the experiences of many of my interlocutors. I now examine the specific traumas that migrants encounter, the effects of legal violence of immigration enforcement, and gender-based violence as factors in health outcomes. When I crossed the border, immigration authorities caught me, 19-year-old Isabel recounts. I had arrived in Arizona, but they took me to Texas. I was there for a whole week. Being in jail was horrible. There were no windows, no way to look outside. If it was night or day, I didn't know. And the food was terrible. They told me it was called La Hielera, the ice box, the place where they locked me up. It was freezing. They gave us these aluminum blankets, which helped a bit, but not much. Isabella went on. There were like 30 or 40 of us locked in the cell. The bathroom was disgusting. Open in the cell, covered by just a few bricks. It smelled awful. I had no freedom to move about. I was locked in there the whole time. Some of the guards would intentionally wake us up when we were sleeping, banging on the doors. Some just walked around the cell to try to catch us doing something. I conducted my fieldwork at a time when the system and conduct of immigration authorities came under intensive scrutiny. In the spring of 2018, the zero-tolerance policy against irregular migration imposed by the Trump administration cruelly separated thousands of migrant children from their parents, hundreds of whom still remain to be reunited. This form of judicial punishment lays hold on the soul. Isabel experienced the physical discomforts of crowded conditions, rationing of food, freezing temperatures, and sleep deprivation. But incarceration also has a cumulative dehumanizing effect. Constant surveillance and the targeting of migrant bodies for disciplinary control grooms them for subservience, docility, and compliance as members of an American underclass. Migrant bodies serve as locales of regulation, emphasizing the role of the state in defining legitimacy. The Salvadoran sociologists Cecilia Menjivar and Lacey Abrego proposed the category of legal violence to describe the punitive and disciplinary functions of the law and the way it harms migrant bodies. They argue that immigration policies purposely construct the status of illegality. In fact, U.S. immigration policy has historically engaged racist, exclusionary practices that welcome migrants as cheap sources of labor while withholding state protection from them. the 1790 Naturalization Act required each naturalized citizen of the United States to be a free white person of good moral character. This orientation persisted with the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which banned Chinese nationals from immigrating or claiming U.S. citizenship, and the 1921 Emergency Quota Act, which set quotas for immigration from countries outside the Western Hemisphere. By contrast, the Immigration Act of 1864 and the Mexican Farm Labor Agreement of 1942, often known as the Bracero Agreement, provided for migrant labor to address U.S. worker shortages on farms and in factories. U.S. political leaders have continued to enact laws to allow U.S. employers to access and exploit migrant workers while blocking pathways to full citizenship. In this way, immigration enforcement epitomizes racial capitalism. The subjugation of brown migrant bodies advances neoliberal interests. I now turn my attention to gender-based violence, a particular concern for migrant women. One of the guides was a man who was about 50 years old, Jacqueline explained. He told me that I should stay and live with him, that he was going to give me everything, that he wanted to pay me to be his mujer, his woman. I said no, that I had no intention of doing that. But he pushed me to have sex with him. He told me, if you don't accept, I'm going to leave you out in the dirt. And he said, you have no one. You have no one here. And now you're in another country, so you can't do anything. After that, he started treating me badly. He no longer paid attention to me. He would leave me behind, and he wouldn't wait for me. At one point, when we were walking, a very big thorn, as big as a nail or a screw, got in my shoe and cut up my foot. But the man was already so upset with me, he refused to wait for me. I was scared that he would leave me there, lost in the desert. It was terrifying. Though the guide never directly assaulted Jacqueline, his threats, intimidation, and neglect after she rejected his advances rendered her journey far more precarious. Fear of rape was among the most common concerns for women who crossed the border. In my interviews, I heard many variations of the same dread. Priscilla, there were those rumors that they touched women. There were a lot of criminals and groups from other countries. They began to assault and abuse women. But you take the risk if you want a better life, that life you want to lead.
You're muted, Dr. Strandy.
It seemed like I'd lost access to.
It seems yeah. So if you put up your PowerPoint slides again.
Okay. Was I muted for a bit or?
Nope, it was just like you just ended it. I think.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Back.
We will reattempt. Sorry about that. Does it look like you see my screen? Okay. Going back to Isabel's quote, I thought a coyote would grab us when he was high on marijuana because there were two of us women. I was so afraid he would rape me. Almudena, for women, it was more dangerous because they would abuse us. They assault and abuse you if you're a woman. Although none of the women with whom I spoke reported being sexually assaulted during their crossings, their narratives may omit such experiences as a result of feelings of shame and denial. Many, like Jacqueline, were harassed, intimidated, and threatened with abandonment. Threats of leaving women behind to cope alone in the desert have a ghastly basis in fact. In their study of bodies recovered along the migrant trail, the Binational Migration Institute found that women had nearly 3 times greater odds of dying of exposure relative to men. The plight of women migrants often receives less attention in scholarly work on migration, perhaps because most individuals apprehended at the border are single men. Women's choices to migrate, intentionally facing the risks of rape and abandonment, highlight their agency. All of my interlocutors recognize the risks. They undertook careful evaluations of their past and their possible future in their decision to engage in the violent process of migration. So, how should we understand the role of threatened violence and the gender differential in risk? Gender-based violence is often invisible. Even penetrative sexual assault rarely leaves marks on the body. But despite the absence of visible scars, this violence persists into the futures of those who experience it. The anthropologist Carolyn Nordstrom notes that these forms of violence have a tomorrow, leaving behind shattered selves, confidences, futures. The most common trauma symptom reported by my interlocutors was the harboring of strong negative beliefs about the world, such as no one can be trusted and the world is completely dangerous. These enduring attitudes shape the ways women relate to others and to their new environment. The nature of these symptoms underscores the limitations of clinical instruments for assessing trauma. The tool I used asked about the experience of sexual violence and threats of sexual violence separately, allowing for me to account for the common experience of fear of potential assault. However, my index of trauma symptoms did not fully capture this warlike mistrust of others and lingering fear many of my interlocutors carried. After fearing sexual assault at the hands of her polleros, smugglers, confronting theft, and enduring 2 months in immigration detention, Almudena described a psychological state akin to shell shock. Some of these things hurt too much. You never fully recover, Almudena said. When I first got here, it was different, difficult. Why couldn't I just lead a happy life? I was filled with negativity. Everything bothered me. She paused before continuing. From there, you decide to pull away from people. I stopped talking with my cousins and my friends at work. It's like no one can understand what had happened. Such patterns of avoidance and mood change are characteristic of PTSD. Yet Almudena's score was a 2 out of 80. The instrument failed to record her psychological sensitivity in the way that deep ethnographic engagement did. After my interview with Almudena, we spoke about services that would benefit her, as well as the power of being heard. Humanity needs to know these stories, right? About us immigrant women? Her tone became more urgent. People do not know. It's honestly incredible that this is happening in humanity. Why build the walls, right? Or the borders? Without these barriers, so many people would not expose their lives because so many people have died right there in the desert. Why not just give a permit? Let us work. Her concerns speak to the need for policy reforms and to the role that clinicians, scholars, and advocates have in ensuring that services remain open to all migrants who'd benefit from them. The racialized violence against migrant bodies continues beyond the border as migrant women seek reproductive care. In this section, I describe the racial power dynamics by which predominantly white providers treat Latina birthers and set the stage for harm, as was the case for Celia. Last Saturday, the pain started. I went into the hospital, but there was no space for me yet. Celia related the beginning of her traumatic birth story with calm resignation. Her older son had been born via C-section, and per her medical records, she had an unknown uterine scar, meaning she did not know, and her obstetricians in Ecuador had not documented where her uterus had been cut. Despite this, Celia consented to a trial of labor after cesarean, TOLAC, 3 months prior to her delivery. In the morning when Celia arrived at the hospital, she had already begun bleeding. She told me, I had started bleeding. That's why I went in. I was going to wait it out until the pains became stronger, but it was already too much. I went in that same day, but they sent me back. At the time, I was a medical student, and I knew that bleeding late in pregnancy raises concerns for several complications, and that clinical guidelines suggest that vaginal bleeding and abdominal pain in women with histories of C-sections, particularly during labor, almost always indicate an emergency. But despite these warning signs, the medical team at the hospital originally turned Celia away. When she returned to the hospital that night, Celia received an infusion of Pitocin, a synthetic form of the hormone oxytocin, to accelerate her labor. They began the induction on Saturday, and from that night through the morning, the pains were very strong. In the morning, they gave me stuff for the pain, so I had a lot of strong medicine in me, but I told them I couldn't take the pain anymore. The next step, they said, was to inject my back, the medicine they give you when you're going to have a C-section. It was only with that medicine that I was able to endure the pain. Then, around 4 in the afternoon, the baby was still there and he wasn't coming. Many hours had passed and I was not dilating normally. I tried pushing, but now there was no way for him to come down. But by that time, it was too late, and the pains were so strong that I was like, I can't take it anymore. I don't remember very well, but they were telling my husband that my pain could be because my wound was opening. So they took me away to the operating room in about 10 minutes, and then they realized that it was the wound that had opened. Celia suffered a lateral extension of her original uterine incision, or a broad stretching of the scar that tore open her uterus. Not only this, but both of her uterine arteries, the major vessels that supply blood to her uterus, had ripped open. The obstetrician also noted that 4 centimeters of her uterus had thinned so much that her son could be seen through the tissue. Celia's red blood cell volume dropped to a dangerously low level. She received 2 units of transfused blood. Celia continued, "It was almost as if I had like a double birth. I was unrecognizable. The next day after delivery, it was ugly. My entire body was swollen from head to toe. My blood pressure went up. I got dizzy. They took a lot of blood out of me, and then they had to put blood back in me to be able to recover." Despite these harrowing events, including uterine rupture, postpartum hemorrhage, postpartum preeclampsia, the attending physician described Celia's C-section as uncomplicated in her discharge summary. The oversimplified label of Celia's C-section as uncomplicated, the medical blunders that occurred during her birth, and her questionable first C-section highlight how obstetric racism takes the dual form of disempowering women through both inadequate care and unwanted intervention.
So you're exiting the building at this time. Visiting hours are over. Please ensure you're exiting the building at this time. Thank you.
If you're currently in the hospital and visiting, you should leave. First, Celia was a women's center patient, a label that is often assigned, as I was told, quote, in a derogatory tone, end quote. In other words, Celia came from a safety net clinic and lacked insurance. This, coupled with her inability to speak English fluently, likely contributed to her delay in being admitted for labor. Within this care model, as with many other safety net prenatal clinics, patients see a variety of providers for their prenatal care, including midwives, physician assistants, and rarely obstetricians, and then give birth attended by whomever is on call at the time, usually a resident physician who is still in training. These clinical providers were nearly all white, whereas the patients are nearly all Black or Latina, a dynamic I label the prenatal care color line. Celia had no one who could advocate for her. When she called the hospital describing her early labor pains and bleeding, no dedicated provider could follow up and urge her admission. Even if one of her clinical providers had been on call at the time, none of them spoke Spanish, and thereby did not fully appreciate the nuance of Celia's experience. Celia lost precious hours, likely during which her uterine tear worsened. Second, at several points, providers underreacted to Celia's complaints of pain. Celia raised concerns of severe pain Saturday night and received no relief until the following morning. The American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology states that maternal request is sufficient medical indication for pain relief during labor, yet Celia suffered hours of pain without medication. Celia initially received an opioid medication, generally disfavored for labor pain given its lower effectiveness and higher risks relative to an epidural. Eventually, she did receive an epidural and her labor slowed. During these agonizing hours, the prenatal care color line extended her suffering. Celia's bleeding, severe pain, decrease in uterine tone, and history of prior C-section should have raised red flags for uterine rupture. Her experience raises concerns for racial biases in perceptions of pain and facility of childbirth. Black and Latinx patients across care settings consistently receive lower quality pain care and are less likely to receive opiates for severe pain. This reality may reflect common racialized beliefs, particularly about Black patients, of their possessing less sensitive nerve endings. I often heard providers at the Women's Center speak about how healthy Latin American patients were and how they rarely needed epidural anesthesia. Such efforts are likely well-intended. Trends favoring empowered natural births and benchmarks of limiting C-sections to reduce unnecessary surgeries and complications may encourage providers to recommend against epidurals and C-sections. Still, Black and Latina women more commonly report stressful birthing experiences and disregard for their preferences. Third, Celia was engrafted in a system of biomedicine that views women, particularly poor women, as pathological, possessors of unruly bodies. In their medical notes, Celia's providers state that she failed TOLAC and did not labor, characterizing Celia's body as uncooperative and negating her experience of labor pains lasting more than 24 hours. The reason for her C-section was listed as the head of the baby was big and it never fit, disregarding the truth of her uterine abruption and the concerning clues of vaginal bleeding and prolonged labor. The medical team attributes the emergency surgery to the anatomy of Celia and her baby, rather than to an expected complication of birth following prior C-section. In this way, that prenatal care color line, formed by the racial medical hierarchy, enforced essentialist stereotypes of Latina reproduction upon Celia's body, characterizing it as unruly yet obstetrically hardy and at fault for its traumatic outcome. Celia's distinctive medical history and presentation were flattened based on her status as a poor, Spanish-speaking Latina women-centered patient. Clinicians scaled her assessment of risk to their default for obstetrically hardy, poor brown women they imagine desire or deserve fewer medical interventions. Such presuppositions of health or implicit minimization of risk for Latina mothers may contribute to harmful and even life-threatening biases in care practice. Finally, providers both in Ecuador and in the United States failed to afford Celia respect for autonomy, violating the first principle of biomedical ethics. Celia had birthed her first child via C-section for reasons that were not clear to her. This experience echoed those of many of my interlocutors who reported histories of C-sections in their home countries that were either scheduled early in their pregnancies or ordered for unclear reasons despite their insistence against them. Also, although some Latin American and Latina pregnant people may opt for C-section, often they are funneled through this medicalized path without full knowledge of its implications or active participation in the process. As such, pregnant people like Celia agree to this massive abdominal surgery, not understanding whether it was fully medically indicated or how it might affect their future birth plans. Over-medicalization, as with denial of necessary medical care, increases risk of adverse reproductive health outcomes and disproportionately harms Black and brown birthing people. Such disempowerment constitutes a form of transnational obstetric violence that follows migrants as they journey across borders. When Celia consented to TOLAC despite her unknown uterine scar and unclear obstetric history, she did not have the details needed to make an informed decision about her birth plan. Her vulnerability, considering this incomplete clinical picture, should have entitled her to even more cautious communication about her options during her prenatal care and timely response to her concerns at the time of her birth. Instead, Celia found herself desperately confused, her requests denied, and clinging to her own life, let alone the life of her baby. Here, the obstetric racism enforced by the prenatal care color line endangered and dehumanized Celia. Celia's traumatic birth highlighted her treatment as an undeserving, poor, obstetrically hardy Latina woman, despite the particularities of her medical history, revealing the bipartite structure of obstetric racism that deprives women of agency by denying them care when they need it and forcing care upon them when they do not fully consent. And despite all this, I found myself in awe of these women who, amid this immense economic adversity and limited social support, seemed astonishingly okay, despite these harrowing traumatic histories. This prompted me to reflect on my conventional understanding of resilience. Though definitions vary, resilience generally refers to engaging resources in the face of adversity to achieve goals. Resilience considers social environment as the factor influencing an individual's ability to adapt to difficult life circumstances. This term often implies well-being or positive or protective factors, at least in absence of psychopathology, which lends itself to measurement using pre- and post-intervention assessments in behavioral health research. Nearly all scholars of resilience in clinical medicine, public health, and related social sciences agree that resilience should be optimized and seek to pinpoint the ways that it can be cultivated. This interpretation of resilience fixes the concept as a static characteristic, akin to toughness or grit, rather than as a process of rational action. A more nuanced conceptualization of resilience views it as a trajectory or a process of adaptation or sustained healthy adjustment over time. When I discussed resilience and its relevance to my work with my research assistants, or many of whom were Latinx undergraduates, several cringed. At La Casa Cultural, which is the Latinx Cultural Center at Yale, we talk a lot about resilience, like it's something white people think we should have for making it here, one of my students commented. But that's not it at all. I mean, we're resilient because we have to be. And we joked that the response to, wow, you're so resilient, should be, thanks. It was between that and dropping out or dying. Theories of resilience tend not to conceptualize it as a mode of resistance to oppression. But my interlocutors reveal that this is exactly the dynamic at work. Resilience is not an ability or a choice. It is a conditioned response to the multiple forms of violence they encounter through racism, sexism, immigration reform, enforcement, and economic inequality. In recognition of this reality, I've proposed the term imperative resilience to describe the strategies women employ cognitively, emotionally, and socially to get by in the face of overlapping adversities. Priscilla, for example, told me that she could not afford to let her emotional responses interfere with her ability to handle stress. Instead, she focuses on problem solving. Let's say I do not have something I should, she explained. For example, this month, I only had half the money I needed to pay the electric bill. I couldn't make that bill this month, and so next month I'm going to have to work more hours to cover it. If I get angry about it, things will just get worse. It won't solve anything. So I just try to calm down and look for solutions to be more economical and more organized. Priscilla seemed almost puzzled by my questions about how she bounces back from stress or other difficulties in life. I try to keep things simple, she responded. If I complicate things, I'm not going to solve anything at all. If I complicate things, I get home in a bad mood and I take it out on my children. But they are my responsibility. I have to be the responsible one. If I get angry and yell and scream to let off steam, it does nothing in the end. Quite the opposite. It makes things worse. I just have to calm down and look for solutions. I have to accept and endure. The themes of acceptance and endurance and the desire to shield children from stress echoed throughout my interviews. Women felt it was their responsibility to minimize their affective responses to difficult circumstances, to preserve the emotional and physical health of their children and their pregnancies. At first glance, the coping strategies employed by Priscilla may be seen as maladaptive and described clinically as emotional numbing, repression, and cognitive avoidance. However, women like Priscilla also employ positive coping strategies like problem solving, benefit finding, altruism, and personal or spiritual growth. Although Priscilla might suppress her emotional reactions to stress, she does so out of concern for her children. She focuses on practical solutions to her challenges, like adjusting her budget and work hours. We can characterize these strategies for survival as imperative resilience. This is a performance that becomes actualized through practice. The necessity of suppressing negative emotions, emphasizing the positive, and strategic problem solving reflects not an inherent grit or toughness, nor special access to social and material resources. Rather, it arises as a form of opposition to social injustice, a way of summoning personal and social capacity to fill the voids left by society. The experiences of my interlocutors point to necessary policy reforms. First, we need universal health care for our migrant communities that includes adequate behavioral and mental health services. In Connecticut, legislation has expanded Husky to children up to age 12, and proposed bills have considered expanding the budget to extend that to age 18, but the state has not yet fully committed to this. We can do better. Second, we need provisions for basic needs like food, housing, and diapers, whether through universal basic income or the expansion of services like SNAP and TANF to non-citizens. Third, we need a clear and accessible pathway to lawful migration. updating the migration registry, which has not been touched in 40 years and has previously received bipartisan support, would adjust the status of an estimated 8 million undocumented residents. So, in this conversation, I have attempted to consolidate hundreds of hours of conversations to highlight the global and local forces that constrain women's life opportunities and how they push against those to meet their goals. I want to emphasize a few points. First, the disintegration of democratic institutions in Latin America, largely due to unequal trade relations and the war on drugs, such that these governments neither exercise effective control over force nor provide adequate social support, breeds mistrust and fear and forces women to migrate. Second, migration entails its own experiences of trauma, migration-related trauma, that includes detention and sexual assault or fear of those. Legal violence then grooms migrants for subservience as members of an American underclass. Women are particularly susceptible to the effects of migration-related violence. Third, the process of giving birth in the U.S. submits Latinx pregnant people to a process of racialization that is enforced by a prenatal care color line by which predominantly white providers characterize the physiology and pathology of brown migrant bodies. Fourth, conventional public and mental health approaches may view few symptoms or the absence of symptoms as evidence of resilience, but I argue that this is a necessary conditioned response or resistance to the multiple overlapping oppressions of legal violence, racism, gender-based violence, and economic oppression. Fifth, the term I propose to describe this is imperative resilience, and it describes the cognitive, social, and emotional strategies women use to get by in the day-to-day, to seguir adelante or press onward. Finally, no woman should be forced to rely on her own intrinsic abilities to survive and build a life for herself and her family in a hostile environment. She deserves to be supported and have the capacity to grow her self-worth and invest in her dreams. Policy reforms like pathways to legal migration, basic income and housing support, and universal health care can make this a reality. In the following animation, I summarize some of these key findings using the metaphor of a monarch butterfly to illustrate the imperative resilience of Latina migrant mothers.
When the weather turns and the milkweed wilts, monarch butterflies lift their wings and embark on a perilous migration from the United States to Mexico in search of nectar. In the face of deforestation and climate change, they journey for their survival and for the survival of their offspring. Theirs could be a story of suffering, but I see it as one of power and persistence. Like the monarchs, mothers who migrate from Latin America to the United States face extreme obstacles. They craft their futures and the futures of their children despite devastating inequality, harmful politics, and a global pandemic. They too can be seen as sufferers. Instead, I see resistance. I call this imperative resilience, a strategic approach to push onward or seguir adelante. Imperative resilience sounds like Adelina telling me, whenever something seems stressful, I just don't think about it. I'm just like, there's going to be another day when you can make it better. Or Elvira explaining, you just have to accept it and adapt. Create something nice out of it so you don't have to focus on the bad. It looks like hand-picked partnerships that provide the support mothers need to fulfill their family's goals. It feels like a spark when that moment of prayer or spiritual song carries a message from God. It echoes through the wisdom passed on by mothers and grandmothers to help their daughters dream bigger. But just like a cold snap shocks the monarchs, the COVID-19 pandemic devastated migrant mothers. These women lost work and shuttered themselves at home to protect their children. They watched loved ones contract the virus and die. As Jacqueline puts it was like a trauma. I was afraid of what would happen if I got sick. For 3 months, I didn't go out at all. We kept hearing about people dying. Women like Jacqueline need the essentials like food, diapers, and healthcare. They need protection against domestic violence and a clear pathway to citizenship. Policymakers must build a more nurturing home for these migrant women. In New Haven, Connecticut, a longtime refuge for migrants, children build monarch way stations where the butterflies refuel during their long migration. Like the monarchs, we do not have to force migrant women to suffer or starve. We can work together to create a more nourishing and equitable home for our neighbors.
So that is the conclusion of my discussion. And if you enjoyed this topic, you can read more in more detail with my book, which is the same title, Pressing Onward, The Imperative Resilience of Latina Migrant Mothers. There is a nice little discount code for you there if you are interested in getting your own copy. And I just wanted to share this photo, which is in my favorite neighborhood where I did a lot of my work. And it shares this quote, we rise by lifting others. Nos elevamos cuando elevamos a otros. Thank you again, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you so much. That was very informative, and you combined the whole information, scientific information, with this story, which was very creative. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So let's see if anyone has a question or wants to put any question on the chat box. I have question, but I prefer to give a time to our participants if there is any questions or comments.
Hi, Professor. If I just may jump in. Hi, everybody. My name is Cedric. One thing that stuck with me, and it goes back to like the beginning of the video, and I know I came like 9 minutes late, but I think I just caught up on something that was like just there just for me. You know, I work with a lot of individuals who come from other countries, and you know, a lot of them are Hispanic, and they're hard workers, you know, and they're good people. And I didn't think about it then, but I understand it now, that, you know, when they talk about that amount of money that the mother paid so that she was able to uh, get help in crossing the border. And you know, in my mind, it just stuck with me. Like I said, that initial payment, you know, that was like a down payment for a better life. And it speaks to why they work so hard when they get here, because they have given up so much and sacrificed so much to come here, that when they come, they're not playing any games. Like, that's why they work so hard. They find work and they pull themselves up and they try to make a better life for their family members. So I have a lot of respect for these individuals, and I consider it a great honor to work alongside these people, because I learn a lot from them. So I just wanted to share that, because that's what hit me when because I never thought, you know, that, you know, they were paying to get here. You know, it's always being portrayed like they're just sneaking over here, and you know, and it's just sad how they portray it. But there's a lot that goes on. So I appreciate you sharing that information, because Professor's right. You put a lot of heart and soul into that. You put a lot of data behind information that needs to be shared. So thank you.
No, thank you. And thank you for picking up on that. And I can even just add a little bit of context, like very few people will even dare to cross the border by themselves because it's so dangerous. Like, it's basically a death sentence. And so you do kind of hire somebody to be able to take you. And many people who come here will even still owe money to the folks who smuggled them. And so they have to like work and pay it back. And if not, they can have family members in their home country threatened and kidnapped and, you know, held for ransom. So it is like a very dangerous process. And so you're right, they are not playing any games. And the other piece that I even want to mention is that, you know, people will give up professional jobs in their home countries and will actually feel that cleaning houses or working landscaping is giving them a better quality of life because they're able to actually pay their bills, because there's so much destabilization in the economy and less security in their work, where you can be trained as an accountant, a teacher, a lawyer, and be working 12-hour days and still not have enough to actually feed your family and be able to see them and have job security. You might have to pay for additional trainings or know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody to have an actual secure job in many countries. And for many people, it's just not worth it. And they would rather clean houses and have some control over their schedule and be able to be done at 3 or 4 p.m. and actually see their kids than have that uncertainty in their home country, even though they have their professional title. So that's also kind of a piece of what the decisions that people are making.
Powerful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cedric, for sharing, and thank you, Dr. Cerdeña, for your response. Is there any other questions or comments?
Well, I was actually curious. Obviously it's very in the news that things are getting a lot more aggressive. And I was just wondering, are you seeing the effects of that, or are you seeing people more feeling under stress, under threat constantly in the people you're encountering?
Yeah, the really sad thing is that there are very insensitive individuals who are taking advantage of the fact that there is threatened and heightened immigration climate to basically manipulate migrants and people who are living here undocumented to essentially get them to do things that they wouldn't otherwise do. So it's, trying to pull their labor from, the competitor to them. Or it's basically trying to, let's say that there are a bunch of folks who are undocumented who are living in the apartment building next door, and you don't like that there are a bunch of people speaking Spanish outside. There have been people who have been starting rumors essentially, or making fake papers saying that ICE is going to be conducting, or that ICE is going to be investigating this area, basically making things that look very real, and putting them outside people's doors, or, saying that threatening raids or kind of starting rumors like that to basically get people to do what they want. And they're kind of capitalizing on the very, very real fear that people have. And it's just horrible. And there's just so much threat and uncertainty that people are dealing with. And it's incredibly traumatic. I mean, there are children who are living with this genuine fear that they're going to come home and their parents aren't going to be there. And then there's also the, additional kind of threats and fake fear that people are just stirring up because they can. And when people are telling me this, it's like heart-wrenching and gut-wrenching. And I think that in, Connecticut and in the city of New Haven in particular, Hartford is this way as well, Stamford is this way, there are kind of general kind of city policies that they will not cooperate with federal immigration authorities. But even, in certain places we've seen that even if local law enforcement is not complying or agreeing, that federal immigration authorities have been overriding them and really kind of been deputized to be much more aggressive in their immigration enforcement. So that's really, really scary. And it's a really, really scary time to be kind of here without papers, regardless of whether you've committed a crime or not. And I think that most people have in the past felt that as long as you're living here and you're, going to work and not hurting anybody and being fine, then you're okay. But now that is totally upended, and that's what's been so distressing. So if you work with, folks in that situation, I would be particularly sensitive to that because it is just a whole new reality.
Thank you. In the chat, we have some comments from people. Inez says, it was so very hard to hear this story and to know there are so many people who are suffering and abused in these ways and face these horrible situations. The constant stories of harm coming to people in our nation feels so surreal and shocking. Thank you for your hard work. So then Emily also wanted to say that she has to leave now, but she really appreciated this conversation, especially given the political climate, and that she believes that it's critical to have these conversations for current and future providers. And she also says thank you.
Thank you all so much. And I also just want to say that we all don't have to be helpless, like we can be empowered. I mean, I think that there are things that we can do. I mean, I mentioned kind of on the Connecticut political landscape, I mean, there are considerations for budget expansion to be able to better protect the health of undocumented migrants. I think that, you know, there is a lot of opportunity to speak up for at least how our kind of local government participates in immigration enforcement. I think that, you know, many of our legislators are on board, but there are some who are in disagreement. So thinking about that and the ways that we can use our voices, and I think, you know, leveraging our positions in our, you know, cultural capital, social capital, political capital, and, you know, bearing our titles as scholars and clinicians and whatever that may be, and also just kind of using these spaces that we have, you know, the opportunities that we have for people who are facing those situations, and exercising that empathy and that understanding is incredibly powerful. Yes, thank you for bringing this up, Kyler. So yes, so Avello has been indicted, or kind of been very high a target of criticism because of Avello Air. So Avello Air flies out of Tweed and Bradley Airport because they have been participating in deportation flights. So there's been a lot of community activism, basically trying to boycott Avello, and also bringing a lot of attention to that. So there have been protests happening at Tweed Airport to basically denounce that activity, saying that they should not be participating in deportation flights, and being complicit in the administration's efforts to be more aggressive with immigration enforcement. So that's another way to be involved.
Yes,
Yeah,
Beth, you want to thank you so much.
Yes, I was just going to say this has been a really important topic, especially right now, and really appreciate you being with us, Dr. Cerdeña. I also know that we need to wind up for tonight, and I wanted to say thank you for everybody here for joining us this evening. We're excited to share that our next event will be a collaboration between the Social Justice Committee and the Ethnic Diversity Task Force, or EDTF, hosting the Community Healing Network, also known as CHN. Launched in 2006, CHN is the only organization focused exclusively on mobilizing Black people to heal from and extinguish the root cause of global anti-Blackness, which is based in the lie of white superiority and Black inferiority. The event will take place on May 29th and feature two esteemed presenters, Ilona Aird, and Chandra Roxanne. We are also honored to have Dr. Jan Owens-Lane, the EDTF founder, as the moderator for this special event. I want to end by emphasizing that together we are the facilitators for change and empowerment of individuals and our community. The Social Justice Speaker Series works to ensure that education and awareness remain powerful tools for making a difference in our community. The donation link and mailing address are available in the chat if you want to support us. For those registered for continuing education credits, I invite you to complete the CE evaluation link, which is now being added to the chat, to receive your certificate. Once again, I thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks again, Dr. Cerdeña.
Thank you.
All right, y'all. I got to hop off, go do some other stuff. But thank you all.
Thank you, Kyler.
Yeah, take care.
Bye-bye. Such an event. Wow. She's such a great speaker, and it was so impactful.
I felt the same.
Wow. So thank you, Beth, for this introduction, for
Should I stop
leading.
recording?
Pardon,
Should I
Andrew?
stop recording? Should I stop recording?
Oh, yes, please. Thank you.